This is the Alfred Daily. Stay safe, Shaftesbury.
It's Friday, the 22nd of May. I'm Kerry Jones. Dorset Council's U-turn on cashless car parking payment is welcomed.
It's another step back to normality, which I think is really good news.
A new fund to help Dorset artists struggling because of the lockdown.
People whose income hasn't just fallen off a cliff, it has completely stopped.
Free money to help Shaftesbury area businesses grow.
We're looking for people with projects of up to £10,000.
The Guy's Marsh craftsman with time on his hands. We meet clockmaker Rich Poulter.
The house is pretty loud on the hour.
We've Where in Shaftesbury with Amber Harrison testing your town knowledge. Town Clerk Claire Commons shares details of 4 new Shaftesbury planning applications.
The first of these is the Grosvenor Hotel.
Historian Claire Riley on a Shaftesbury street's smelly past.
Apparently a lot of people down there kept pigs.
Medicinal herbalist Julie Wood on the plant that's a plaster and works as a mouthwash.
The prettiest weeds you can find.
And you'll hear Nick Crump's recording of the Dawn Chorus as Shaftesbury's wilderness wakes up. Hello, I hope you're well. You'll be able to pay Dorset Council to park at its Angel Lane or Bell Street car parks in Shaftesbury using cash once again. The council disabled coin facilities to lessen the risk of coronavirus transmission. Their U-turn follows complaints from Shaftesbury shoppers and traders about the switch to phone-based payment for parking. In a statement, Dorset Council wrote that in response to public requests, they are reinstating cash and card payments for drivers who don't use a mobile. It applies across the council area. The owner of the potting shed, Nick Andrew, is pleased. He says it wasn't good for business.
Parking in Shaftesbury can be tricky at the best of times, and making it more difficult for people does put people off.
Councillor Derek Beer represents Shaftesbury on Dorset Council.
I had a good example. I had 2 engineers come down from Shrewsbury yesterday to do some servicing on machinery, but they couldn't download the app at all. So that made it, that actually pointed out that the card option wasn't a decent one.
Derek says he's been concerned about car park charges since they were reinstated following a free parking period during the lockdown.
And there'd been a note on all the car park machines saying you don't have to pay now for all the good reasons they didn't have to pay. And so I was worried that people would glance across, see the note, and believe that they didn't have to pay, and then get a ticket for not paying. So I sent off an email to Dorset County saying, can you perhaps be a bit tolerant for a couple of weeks because people will regard the note as still not having to pay. But I'm really glad that they're accepting coins now because people will be a lot more comfortable. They'll be happier shopping, they'll be happy coming to town and going to the post office or doing what I had to do. And they can just do it in a normal way. It's another step back to normality, which I think is really good news.
Nick Andrew says he understands that safety was Dorset Council's consideration.
Obviously, I appreciate that they have to take into account people's health, but I think the risk at the cash machines is minimal.
And Dorset Council warn that because of the required use of keypads at payment machines, visitors who choose to pay by cash or card do so at their own risk. They're advising you to wash your hands both before and after using the machines to lower the chance of infection. Shaftesbury firefighters have been helping tackle the blaze at Wareham Forest. The fire has been unprecedented, and crew from our town have been working on 12-hour shifts. The fire was first reported at just after 1 o'clock on Monday in the Sugar Hill area. It's caused damage to around 150 hectares of forest and heathland. The fire service has confirmed that the cause is not believed to be malicious. They're advising people to stay away. Yesterday was Dorset's warmest day of the year so far, with 24.5 degrees recorded. Shaftesbury Football Club have announced they'll be using VEO technology, one of the only clubs at the town's level to use the camera-based system to record and replay action. Artsreach, the Dorset charity that brings live theatre, music and dance to our county's rural communities, has put its name to a fund to help struggling local artists. With venues closed, galleries mothballed and festivals cancelled, its chairman, Fanny Charles, says creative people and performers need some support so they'll still be there at the other side of the crisis.
The idea is we want to have a viable, vibrant, local cultural life at the end of all this because people will need it.
Any artist aged over 18 who's unable to pay for essential living costs because of a loss of freelance work can apply for up to £500. A crowdsourcing appeal to bring in extra money for the grant funding pot is also being launched. Fanny says the government's furloughing scheme has been helpful to some arts organisations, but she doesn't want the sector overlooked by decision makers who may prioritise other areas for future funding.
The arts are very, very important. They're very important for our morale, very important for our mental health, and they make a very, very significant contribution to the economy and to tourism, and it's a very, very big factor in the West Country.
It's still unclear when sporting and entertainment events will be allowed. Fanny says theatre and performance has a tougher challenge than rugby, football and cricket because arts are generally held in confined spaces.
Whereas people may be able to get back to some kind of sport because sports arenas tend to be very big and social distancing is not quite so difficult. If you take a theatre like Shaftesbury Arts Centre, social distancing is going to be very, very difficult indeed. Even the business of getting people in and out becomes a huge challenge.
Well, it becomes a real challenge with some of the venues around us that Artsreach operates in as well. Places like the Village Hall in Ashmore, and if it's an indoor event at Springhead, there isn't that much space at all, is there?
There isn't that much space. I mean, the challenge for Artsreach is that although rural touring is described as being nimble, and we are in terms of not having a big venues, and we don't have a lot of staff, we have 3 staff, 2 of whom are part-time. That's it. That's what puts on all those events around the year. But we deal with our volunteer promoters, and they have to be confident about us coming back into their halls. The hall committees have to be confident. The audiences have to be confident about coming back. And then we have to be able to make enough money to pay the artists. So none of it is going to be easy, which is why Artsreach is one of the organisations which is backing the launch this week of a Dorset Artists Emergency Fund.
So what is that going to be?
Let's be clear, this is not like the Arts Council putting hundreds of thousands of pounds in. These are small organisations, and in the case of an organisation like Artsreach, we have no cash to put in ourselves, but what we can do is provide support, publicise, let the artists know. It is intended for individual creative people, artists. They might be solo performers, they could be musicians of all sorts, they might very well be DJs, people whose income hasn't just fallen off a cliff, it has completely stopped overnight with no prospect of it returning in the foreseeable future. And the idea is that people who are faced with huge financial challenges can apply to the fund for grants from £100 to £500.
Now, you're very much connected with the arts, with your own website, the Fine Times Recorder, and also as chair of Artsreach. So what's your feeling, Fanny, on when you think the semblance of normality is going to return with people being able to go back to performance venues?
I'd like to have that crystal ball. I mean, we hope that it may be possible for the larger theatres which can both cope with a maximum of 50% seating, and maybe it will be less than 50%, and have good management systems to deal with the complexity of getting people in and out. I'd love to think that there will be some pantomimes. Come next year, we, Artsreach and other organisations, will be looking at doing open-air stuff that is much easier to manage in terms of arrivals and distancing. Artsreach will be looking at getting some visual arts activity going, and we're also looking at bringing, for example, Living Spit, Howard and Stu, who are super popular actors and comedians. They've been to Shaftesbury Arts Centre, they come to the Exchange, a variety of shows. We're talking to them about getting one or more of their shows available on YouTube. I think we will see possibly some experimental, maybe outdoor stuff in the autumn that could, for example, involve maybe some folk singing, that maybe people could do workshops online and then meet in the open air to do perhaps some seasonal songs.
If you want to donate to the fund or you want to apply for cash relief, you'll find the relevant links on the Alfred Facebook page.
This is the Alfred Daily.
I was sitting in the garden yesterday afternoon and the buzzing of a bee got my attention. I think I've recorded Shaftesbury's loudest bee. Have a listen to this. If you can make a louder bee recording on your mobile phone, send it over and we'll play it on the Alfred Daily. If you've been walking a lot, particularly in long grass, check yourself carefully for ticks. One of my friends had a trip to Salisbury Hospital this week after a tick was found lodged in her eye. She's okay. It's quite horrific, isn't it? Christine's been in touch to say that Jean's Sweet Shop is being overlooked. That's the newsagents on Bell Street. Christine says they're catering for those who can't always get to Tesco, especially the elderly. And Jean's do dairy items and certain groceries. They even took on WH Smith customers with the paper deliveries and the paper boys. And she thinks it's disappointing. Well, to be fair, on Wednesday we did have a big picture of Jean's Sweet Shop on our social media when we were highlighting the fact you can get a copy of the new Vale Journal newspaper. We chose Jean's as the place to promote where you can get it from. But thanks for your email, Christine, and hopefully Jeans have had a fair shout now. An update on the latest planning applications from Shaftesbury's Town Clerk, Claire Commons, in a moment. But first, the return of Amber Harrison, who had a couple of days off. She's here with your test of Shaftesbury knowledge.
Hello. For today's Where in Shaftesbury, we're asking what links the following items: a Newton Wonder, a Malcolm Russet, and a Wilcombe Beauty. Well, a Wilcombe Beauty sounds like somebody you'd find in a bathing suit at the seaside, but it's not. Pop your thinking caps on, keep listening, and we'll tell you later if you've got the connection between these items right.
This is the Alfred Daily. Stay safe, Shaftesbury.
There are 4 new planning applications affecting the Shaftesbury Town Council area that are currently out for consultation with Dorset Council. The first of these is the Grosvenor Hotel. They've submitted 2 applications for the same works. One is for listed building consent, the other is a full planning consent request. And the detail of the application is to convert 3 residential units to the rear of the hotel into additional hotel accommodation to increase the bedroom numbers by 10, and to convert basement floor area of the units to improve the hotel WC facilities and to create additional dining space. The section that affects the listed building consent is to open up new internal access door, create new window openings and carry out the associated internal and external alterations. The expiry date for comments on this application is Friday the 5th of June. The next application to be considered is Annex 4 at Hames Lane, and this is to erect 1 dwelling and demolish the existing single-storey dwelling. The expiry date for comments on this application is Saturday the 6th of June. The next application are 2 applications for the same location for the barn at Salisbury Road. This is a householder application and listed building consent for internal alterations to the existing double garage, loft and insulation of 3 Velux roof lights and a new entrance from the garden. The expiry date for comments on this application is Sunday the 7th of June. The last application that's currently out for consultation is for 19 Leighton Lane, and this is for the addition of a sun tube to the orangery, and the expiry date for comments on this application is Thursday the 11th of June. As always, all the applications are available on the Dorset Council website. Search planning applications.
If your Shaftesbury area business has ambitions to grow, you could be entitled to free money from an EU fund. The Small Growth Grant Scheme has just been launched for applicants who can show their firm will expand over the next 6 months. If you've been trading for over a year, you can apply. Nick Gregory is the Programme and Partnerships Manager of the Dorset Growth Hub.
Yeah, we're saying that people have really been able to trade for a year already before we look at it. It's very hard to ascertain in the first period. We do business support for startups and pre-startups, but in terms of getting a grant, we want to be able to look at a business, look at their accounts and have an idea that they're in a position to grow on the basis of how they've done in their track record, really.
What sort of businesses would you expect to apply for this small growth grant?
small manufacturing businesses, people with online web sales. We can't generally look at restaurants and shops, although they're looking at changing the rules in Europe, but that they've been excluded in the past, so we're hoping that might change.
So broadly, it's not really the tourism sector, or would you allow some tourism businesses that weren't retail or hospitality?
If there weren't retail or hospitality, the European regulations have always been quite clear. They're concerned about what they call displacement, which means if they funded a shop selling, say, ice cream on the high street, it might displace another one. So that's always been a concern. But I know that our project manager has a meeting with the minister tomorrow to try and voice the concerns that we have in Dorset, that our tourism and hospitality industry has been very hard hit, and could we use our funds in that sector, but not at the moment.
How much money can people apply for?
It's a little bit of a movable feast, really, but we're looking for people with projects of up to £10,000, and we can supply maybe 25% of that pot.
So you don't give the full whack. If my project costs £10,000, I can't ask you for £10,000?
No, we help you to find the other money, whether that might be from a grant you might have from the government, whether you might borrow it from somewhere, take a loan, have another grant. But this is European money. We can only give a quarter of your project.
How soon do you expect to start paying people?
We obviously can't pay someone until we've approved it, so you can't spend the money, then apply. You have to get approved, spend the money, then we repay you. But typically 4 to 6 weeks.
How much paperwork is involved with this if you're applying?
Some of the earlier grants, going back into the deep, dark history of the past, have been very long and wordy. And I actually wrote these forms myself a couple of 3 years ago, and my whole aim and object was to make it very simple. What do you want to do? What do you want to achieve? How much do you want to spend? And what on? And as long as you're eligible, then it's very straightforward.
And if you want more information, you can find it on the Dorset Growth Hub website. For many Shaftesbury residents, particularly those self-isolating, you might feel that time has stood still over the last few months. That's not been the case for Guismarsh-based clockmaker Rich Poulter. He's been busy doing what he loves.
It's a very rewarding job. It can be tedious and it can be frustrating. Patience is a virtue, and nothing is done by shortcuts.
Rich has 30 years' experience as a horologist. That's the term for a clockmaker. For 22 years, he juggled the work with his day job in a pharmaceutical company. But when they relocated to the Middle East, he went full-time as a clockmaker 7 years ago. He's passionate about clocks. It's in the family.
My great-grandfather was sales director at Smith's. I mean, it's a pretty household name, or it used to be at least 30 or 40 years ago. Everybody had a Smith's clock in their house. And the instruments of cars, the speedos and the rev counters and clocks and so on were made by Smiths. He started in the trade in the late 1890s when Smiths was a shop in the Strand in London. So he started sweeping the floors, and he worked his way up very, very quickly as the company was expanding. He met a few very interesting people. One of them was Malcolm Campbell, the record breaker, who used to need instruments for his cars. And he had a very good friendship with him, so I think that's really where my interest started.
It's quite rare that you find a horologist, but because it's a specialist role, Rich says there's enough work to go around.
There's very few people that do it, really. I mean, we're spread quite thin and far between. You know, the work is there. You'd be surprised how many houses are out in these little tucked-away places that have clocks and nobody to see to them.
I suppose a lot of people that you see, there's a story connected with the clocks that you're asked to look after.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I had a clock in recently that was a hand-me-down from Florence Nightingale, and it was given to one of her nurses that looked after her in elderly age. It was given to this nurse, who then passed it down to her son, and then to her son after that. And so I called into a guy who wanted his clock looked at in Shaftesbury, and he has the clock now. This carriage clock. I mean, every clock has a piece of history attached to it. We're merely custodians, really, of this piece of history that floats through the ages. When you open up a clock, you can always see in the back of the front plate or the back of the dial some inscriptions from a previous clock repairer. So the history is sort of built on as it goes through life.
I guess if we went back 50, 100 years, every community would have had somebody repairing clocks.
Yeah, very true. They started off in the 14th and 15th century onwards. Blacksmiths used to make tower clocks for the local church. The technology got better and the materials became more obtainable. People used to have them in their homes and made for them, but they were a very expensive item in those days, so somebody who had a clock in the very early days was really quite well to do. It's nice to have a working antique that still does its job. People generally like a clock that has a tick, a kind of a heartbeat, as opposed to a battery that you just fit in the back and away it goes. So each clock tends to have its own personality.
Is there a clockmaker, perhaps no longer still trading, that you really admire the work of? If you get a timepiece from somebody and it's been made by this manufacturer, you know it's going to be of very high quality.
I mean, yes, indeed. There's prestigious makers like George Daniels, of course, who he's an absolute genius, invented a new way of regulating time through an escapement of his own, and he actually sold the patent to the Swiss. But he's unfortunately he died. But I mean, his work still goes on in his old workshop with his employees. So I mean, there are craftsmen who will make you a watch or a clock to your specifications still.
Do you get asked to make clocks?
No, I haven't. I mean, a clockmaker can make a clock. There's a very little demand for a brand new clock. It's usually the restoration of an existing.
What's been your most challenging piece of work?
3 years ago, I was asked to do an 8-bell triple FUC clock, which did the Whittington chimes as well as the Westminster chimes. And it was made for the coronation of Edward VIII. It's a relatively new clock, but it's a handmade clock and very well made. But it did practically everything you could ask of a clock to do. It told the date, the year, the day. It had a moon phase. As I said, it did all the chimes. So it was a very comprehensive movement, which was challenging, but of course very rewarding when you can get the clock as it should be, and the customer very happy with the results.
Rich says he finds his work particularly satisfying when his customers are happy.
You can see the joy on their faces as they receive this item back, fully functioning, looking nice and bright, and it's a sense of satisfaction.
So do you dread the end of British summertime when you've got to change the clocks? Do you have to do that?
Yes, I do, as much as anybody else does.
Well, I suspect you've got quite a few more clocks than most people have got in your care.
The house is pretty loud on the hour, so I tend to record the news and listen to it in 5 minutes' time.
Rich's website is theclockworkshopshaftesbury.com.
This is the Alfred Daily. Stay safe, Shaftesbury.
Shaftesbury historian Claire Riley offers an insight into our town's past and some of the long-gone activities still remembered by our town's street names.
Laundry Lane and Tanyard Lane. Those names have been in place for hundreds of years because both of them served the Abbey. Obviously, one was doing all the laundry and one was tanning the leather. The tanneries and the laundries were placed down in this area because they both produce a great deal of unpleasant smells, and also they needed water, access to water, and the spring line was very near there. Stony Pass was at one point Landy or Laundry Lane, so you can imagine people toiling up and down with great bales of first dirty laundry down to the laundries and then toiling up again to take them back to the Abbey, so it must have been extremely hard work. One of the things that Laundry Lane was very famous for was its pigsties. Apparently a lot of people down there kept pigs, which people didn't complain about. They were perfectly happy to have them there, and it was quite well known, and there were quite a few eccentric characters who lived down there as well. In Tanyard Lane, there was a coach builder's in the 19th century, and he used to do all the woodwork in his yard, and then he would bore through bolt holes through the hubs of the wheels with a series of red-hot pokers, which his daughter heated from in the kitchen fire. Once the wheels were made, they were taken up to the forge, which is in the cattle market, and then they were rolled down Stony Pass. Can you imagine rolling something as heavy as an iron wheel down Stony Pass? Must have taken a lot of skill.
This is the Alfred Daily.
Let's go to East Stour now and join our medicinal herbalist, Julie Wood. He'll tell you about a plant you can use if you become injured when you're out and about.
Hello. Today we're going to talk about what has to be one of the prettiest weeds you can find. And I'm sitting outside my back door beside a clump of Herb Robert. Herb Robert is one of the geranium family, also known as the cranesbills. And they have this name because of their seed heads, which look very much like the beaks of cranes. They're very long and slender and pointed. The plants I'm sitting beside have the seeds heads already forming, as well as the flowers at the same time. And these flowers are small, and I would describe them as bubblegum pink, with 5 petals that are little white stripes too. And the leaves are very lacy and soft and covered with tiny hairs. And the stems of this plant are very red, which is quite a characteristic. So the plant has other names. It's called red robin. It's called St. Rupert, after a 7th century Austrian bishop. And it's called bloodwort and dragon's blood. So the name red robin, the red would have positive associations referring to blood and life. But the robin seems to have more association with ill luck and death. Shakespeare writes about Robin Goodfellow, otherwise called Puck, in his play A Midsummer Night's Dream. Robin Goodfellow is a nature sprite or demon or fairy. He's mischievous and he moves fast, which has definite connotations with the medicinal action of this plant. So the negative connotations are really around the phrases "Who killed Cock Robin?" and "Do not cross Robin Goodfellow," and "Do not uproot Herb Robert." Culpeper writes about Herb Robert. Culpeper's the herbalist from the 16th century, and he says that Herb Robert comes under the dominion of Venus. And I quote, "It is esteemed an excellent remedy for the stone, and will stay blood from whatever might cause it to flow. It speedily healeth all green wounds, and is effectual in curing old ulcers in the privities and other parts." So when he's talking about stone there, he means kidney stone. And when he says will stay blood, he's referring to its hemostatic qualities. So Herb Robert is very much a wound herb. It's rich in tannins, which are these astringent constituents that tighten and tone. It's also antimicrobial, so the combined qualities there are great for cuts and grazes, for gastric and peptic ulcers too. Also nosebleeds, hemorrhoids. Generally, it stems the excessive flow of any of our bodily fluids, so be it mucus, blood, or even milk. Leaves can be made into teas, fresh leafy tea, and if you pick a fresh leaf and crush it, there's this sort of musky, mousy smell to it. And apparently you can rub this onto the skin, just crush the leaves and rub them onto the skin, and they can act as an insect repellent. They would also work on any cuts and grazes that you might have if you're out and about and you need a quick natural plaster, or certainly to stem the blood flow. This action of the herb also lends itself to being an excellent mouth gargle, mouthwash, for any gum disease and for also sore throats. So looking up in my old herbal books, I find that there's traditional uses for pain relief. And they don't explain why, but I have read of description of somebody using it as a compress for backache. and also for painful earache. That was mixed with essential oil of lavender, and I think red clover was in that recipe too. Also traditionally used for inflammation, any inflammatory conditions, and tumours. So another constituent in these wonderful pretty little plants is the flavonoids. They have many therapeutic effects on the body, including the antimicrobial action. They're also highly antioxidant, which means that they are, again, counterbalancing the effect of those damaging free radicals that whiz around the body. Flavonoids are anti-inflammatory, and they also bring the anti-hyperglycemic effect, which means they can help to reduce blood sugar levels. The other action that is being discovered more of late, and Herb Robert is becoming very much noticed in the herbal world and in the mainstream science world now, as having very many potentially beneficial effects for our health. But coming back to this use for tumours, it's cytotoxic, which means it will kill cellular growth, excessive cell growth, I should say, so tumour cell growth. I found lots of references to people using this herb to help manage their cancer. There's no research at the moment to actually back this, something I hope that will be explored and researched more into the future. So you could try taking 4 or 5 leaves each morning as a preventative for many, many health conditions. So it's a kind of all-round self-healing plant. That's how I'm beginning to understand this amazing little, pretty little weed. You could add your leaves to a smoothie, or you could just chop them up with some avocado perhaps. And you can make a tea with a couple of sprigs. You could decoct it, which means boil it up and simmer it for longer. And you could also make a tincture with the fresh plant. Herbalist Julie Bruton Seal explains that she's found it very hard to dry, so we do really need to work with the fresh plant. But luckily it's one of these plants that, as I explained, lasts most of the year. So what a great way to start the day, with some Herb Robert in your green smoothie as your all-round healing beneficial herb. Wonderful. That's all for now. Bye.
We're back with the Alfred Daily tomorrow with Saturday's edition. Poor Nick Crump, his alarm clock is getting earlier and earlier, and he was up at literally the crack of dawn to capture the sound of the wilderness in Shaftesbury waking up. Enjoy this. I'll talk to you tomorrow. Stay safe, Shaftesbury.